Greetings everyone, thanks for joining me. Great to be with you again. Just going to share some thoughts around, I'm going to pose the question to you, has the fire gone out? But just before we do that, a reminder to those of you from C3 Monash who are watching at the moment, just that we're having our first sort of public gathering in quite a while on Wednesday week, the 26th of August. So that's next Wednesday night from 7 till 8. We're going to be having a bit of praise and worship and prayer and ministry. And we're looking forward to experiencing again the power and presence of God as we gather together. So you need to go onto our C3 Monash website and register for that, but that is Wednesday week, our first gathering together for a while. So looking forward to that. Anyway, I hope you guys are doing well, and we're continuing, just wanting to continue some thoughts out of the book Reappearing Church by Mark Sayers. We're up to chapter 8 this week, and the question that he asks, why the church needs revival. Not a question, a statement. Why the church needs revival. And part of the response to that is that maybe the fire has gone out a little bit since what first happened at Pentecost all those years ago. The apostles were renewed by the power of the Spirit to engage with God's purpose to fill creation with His presence and go into the world and multiply. The essence of what we are to do as Christians is to take God's presence into the world. To take God's presence into the workplace, into schools, into hospitals, wherever we go, into homes, obviously, we take God's presence. And we saw that the power of the presence of God fell on the disciples at the time of Pentecost. But it wasn't that many years after that it seemed like the fire went out and there was a cooling off amongst God's people. And I was reminded, as I was thinking about this, of the scripture in Revelation chapter 3, and it says this in the Message translation: I know you inside and out, and find little to my liking. You're not cold, you're not hot. Far better to be either cold or hot. But you're stale, you're stagnant, you make me want to vomit. You brag that I'm rich and I've got it made and I need nothing from anyone, oblivious in the fact that you're a pitiful blind beggar, threadbare and homeless. And wow, that's a stinging rebuke and an observation of Jesus as he looks at the church in the end times and calls us lukewarm. And it kind of stings a bit to think the fact that maybe as a church we've kind of grown lukewarm to the things of God. And we get impatient with God's timetable and we want to take things into our own hands, which when we do that, we're running ahead of what the Spirit is doing, and it's tantamount to heresy because we think we can do it better than God. And that kind of elevates pride and that sort of attitude and demeanor above surrender to God and His purposes, like we talked about last week. Patient, open-ended yieldedness gives way to us wanting to take control. I was listening to Peter Scazzero podcast during the week, and he talks about the current pandemic as being what he calls a biological persecution. So it's not a political persecution or a ideological persecution, but in fact it's a sense of this biological persecution. But he goes on to sort of talk about the fact that historically, when the church has been persecuted and has been restrained and restricted from gathering together and meeting corporately, and has had to go underground in a sense and meet in smaller gatherings and homes and those sort of places, that has historically been when the church has thrived and grown the most. And we can even see that evidenced in this day and age in places like China. And so, we might think that, it's a problem that we can't gather together corporately the way that we want to. And one of the things as a church that we've decided to do is actually not to come back together and for Sunday services until we can meet without any restrictions. That's what we've felt is God sort of speaking to us about at this point in time. But that doesn't mean that the church is dying. Far from it. Church is thriving in homes and cafes and all over the place, right around Canberra. people are meeting and experiencing God and talking about the good things of God and how He's changed their lives, and encouraging other people and praying for one another. It's just so exciting to see. And, this is all happening outside of a Sunday service. So, the church is thriving in so many ways. And sure, we miss the corporate worship and just the gathering together and the hugs and all of that sort of public displays of affection, if you like. But there's a deeper thing going on that I believe that God's doing through us and through our church. And I think it's a really good thing. So the question to be asking then firstly of God is, okay, God, what are you doing? What are you saying to us? What are you up to in this season, in our city, in our community? What are you up to in the local church in the 21st century? And then maybe a good question to be asking of ourselves, has the fire gone out? Am I in danger of being lukewarm like the church in Revelation because I've let the passion of God, the passion for His presence to die out? And just going back to Mark Sayers' book, he has this phrase that he calls cultural Christianity, and he defines it this way. He says, when Christianity is inherited and affirmed as a cultural identity rather than a lived personal faith, that's what cultural Christianity is. It's just an identity rather than a reality of relationship. And he goes on to say, certain Christian practices are enacted in order to maintain a cultural identity. There may be personal elements of faith, but the dominant framework of Christian practice is held in place by cultural expectations and tradition. The values of a culture mixed with faith, blurring the lines between both. And so he's sort of saying that a cultural Christianity that kind of aspires to the ideals and those sort of tenets of the faith, but actually are missing the reality of the presence of God, contributing to this sense of lukewarmness in the life of the church. And so I remember when I first became a Christian through a parachurch group, and I was at a camp and responded to an altar call after sitting, listening to a message on a bale of hay for a period of time. And the first thing that we were invited to do in response to that was to go outside into the night sky and sit and sense the presence of God. And ever since that moment, that shaped my Christian walk, is to just get alone in nature with God and experience His presence. And I want to encourage you to do that at this time and today. Get into the presence of God. And I was reading out of a book called Insurgents by Frank Viola, and he says this: living in the Lord's presence doesn't mean seeking a feeling or even a sense. It's rather the deliberate awareness that the Lord is present in your life. To live in the Lord's presence is to set your mind on Him, to remember Him, and to live the intentional awareness of His abiding life. And Romans 8:6 says this: the mind set on the Spirit is life and peace. I don't know about you, but I want to continue to experience and enjoy a life that is full of peace in the presence of God. And so I want to set my mind on the things of God. I don't want the fire to go out. I don't want to lose that sense of God's presence. And so Christianity is way more than just a simple right belief. It's actually, although the right belief is a key part of it, but it's ultimately a faith of dynamic relationship and engagement personally with the Creator of the universe. And if we, as Dallas Willard says, we run the risk of mutating the message of the gospel into what he calls the gospel of sin management. So if all we have to do is manage our behaviors and appearances to other people, we're missing the point. That might be a cultural Christianity, but it's not the fire that's inside of us from the presence of God. And so, when sin focuses on behavioral externals, which we can eliminate from our lives by a little willpower, but ignores things like pride and covetousness and other hostilities that are there, we're missing the point of the reality of walking with God. And when we talk about the church being renewed, the need for renewal in in the church. Maybe the era that God is leading the broader church globally into at this time. It's around the timeless truths and the realities of the presence of God that were entrusted to us at Pentecost 2,000 years ago, and that are still entrusted to us today to communicate to the world in which we live. I don't want that fire to go out. I don't want that fire to go out in my life. I don't want that fire to go out in your life. Maybe you've gotten a bit lukewarm, and I guess we all go through those sorts of seasons, but I want to see us as God's people in C3 Monash and in Canberra and further afield, on fire again for God in a new and powerful way. So God bless you this week. May you be ever aware of the presence of God. May it be a lived reality in your life. May the fire never go out, and may the zeal of God consume you every day. God bless you. We'll see you soon.